Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories. Tonight we begin a journey that moves not by storm or battle, but by footstep, kindness, and quiet courage. This is a tale of bread and salt, of lost sons and found paths, of strangers who become family, not by blood, but by choosing to walk together. Let your thoughts drift like leaves on a quiet river. Let the world slow down. And follow the light of a distant lighthouse. This is One Road Ends, Another Begins. A bedtime story, made for those who carry the heart of home with them, even when they don't know where it is yet. Now rest. The road will wait. The rain had been falling since dawn, not a storm, not a downpour, but a steady, patient drizzle that turned the earth dark and soft, and made every rooftop in the village breathe steam. The smell of wet soil mixed with the scent of baked dough. It was morning in the north. Marta had been awake since before the sky turned gray. She always rose early, even when there was no one waiting for bread. Her shop, part bakery, part grocer, part shelter for the lonely, sat near the edge of the village, where the hills rolled into the sea. She pulled open the shutters with quiet hands. Rain tapped lightly on the wood. Inside, Anton was already stacking crates. Onions. Cabbage. Small, silver fish laid neatly in a wooden tray lined with straw. He didn't speak at first, he rarely did before breakfast, but Marta could feel the tension in his movements. He was 22. Too young to be so tired. Too sharp to trust the world. You could smile, she said, not unkindly. It's raining, he replied, not looking up. Some people like the rain. I'm not one of them. Marta only chuckled and lit the oven again. The scent of rye and salt and rosemary bloomed in the room like an old memory. Joseph arrived not long after, as he always did, tall, bearded, quiet as a boulder. He didn't speak unless something needed saying. He lifted a sack of flour over one shoulder with ease and nodded once in greeting. Marta offered him half a loaf and a boiled egg. He took both, and sat near the window. It was an ordinary day. Until the door opened. It didn't open with a crash, or a shout. It opened like a question. Two boys stood there, soaked to the bone. Their clothes were worn, their shoes, if you could call them that, hung from their feet like ragged sails. The older one, perhaps 18, held the younger steady. The boy, no more than 14, was pale, shivering, his lips a shade too blue. Marta stepped forward without hesitation. Come, she said, reaching for a towel. Anton, behind her, didn't move. Do they have money? Look at them, she whispered. I am, he answered. That's why I'm asking. The older boy tried to speak. His words were broken, the syllables shaped strangely. Another language. But he raised his hand, touched his heart, and said, Theo. He pointed to the boy beside him. Emile. He paused. Then added slowly, in fractured local speech. Our ship. Gone. Storm, bad men. We swim. Beach. Marta took their hands and pulled them gently inside. Theo and Emile sat near the stove while Marta poured them warm water and tore a loaf into small pieces. Emile ate like someone who had forgotten food existed. Anton stood at the back, arms crossed. We don't even know where they're from. They're from the sea, Marta said. That's not a country. No. But it's where they nearly died. Joseph said nothing. But he watched. He always watched. That evening, after the shutters were closed and the lamps lit, they sat around the table, the 5 of them. Marta stirred a pot of stew. Emile dozed, head on his arm. Theo sat upright, his hands still, his eyes wide. Slowly, haltingly, he told them. A merchant ship. Their father, a navigator, proud, gentle, always humming sea songs. A night attack. Fire. Blades. Men with cloth masks and quick hands. Theo and Emile thrown into the water, clinging to driftwood, guided by moonlight. No sign of their father. No sign of the ship. Anton listened, lips tight. It's a good story, he said. Theo looked at him, not angry. Just tired. We want, go home, he said. You don't even know where you are. Theo nodded once. We find port. Ship. And how do we know you're not lying? Anton asked. We ask, only bread. Marta didn't reply at first. She reached for another loaf, broke it in half, and passed it to Theo. She looked at Anton. No one begs with eyes like that. That night Marta didn't sleep. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of seaweed and drift. She sat by the window, watching the fog roll in from the cliffs. When the sky began to lighten, she rose. Her back ached. Her hands were cold. But her voice was steady. We're going with them, she said. Anton looked up from the hearth. Where? To the sea, she said. To the port. As far as it takes. He blinked. You're serious. I am. Why? She smiled softly. Because they opened a door. And so must we. Far above, in his small house at the cliff's edge, Joseph opened a wooden chest. Inside, wrapped in cloth, lay an old leather tube. He unrolled it slowly, a faded map, drawn by hand, roads like veins stretching from coast to coast. He lit a candle, and began to trace a path. The road was still wet when they left. Morning mist clung to the edges of the trees, and the scent of damp hay followed them as they passed the last cottage and stepped beyond the edge of what had always been familiar. No fanfare. No farewell. Just the gentle creak of a wooden cart and the quiet shuffling of boots on soft earth. Marta had packed simply 2 loaves wrapped in linen, a pouch of dried fruit, and a flask of elderflower cordial. She walked just behind Joseph, who pulled the cart without complaint, its wheels groaning over stones and roots. His shoulders moved like a silent clock, steady, unfailing. Anton, walking with his hands in his coat pockets, glanced back toward the village once. We'll be missed by lunchtime, he muttered. Then we must walk slowly, Marta said, smiling. Anton didn't return the smile, but neither did he stop walking. This is a march of naive hearts, he added under his breath. But I suppose naive hearts are better than none at all. Theo stayed close to the cart, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. He said little, but moved with quiet resolve. Emile trotted beside him, never straying far, his fingers brushing the edge of his brother's coat as if afraid the world might pull him away again. They passed the first ridge before midday. From there, the road curved gently downward through fields dappled with wildflowers. The air smelled of wet clover and churned earth. A heron watched them from a fence post, still as sculpture. By afternoon, they reached a fork in the path and found a canvas tent set up near a cluster of oaks, its fabric faded, patched in places with ribbon and old embroidery. A crooked sign leaned beside it. Tales for trade. A man sat outside cross-legged, his hair white, his eyes clouded with time. In his lap, a small crate of speckled apples. Food for a story, he said softly as they passed. Anton rolled his eyes. He'll ask for coin next. But Marta stopped. She opened her pack and handed the man half a loaf, still warm in its wrapping. Bread for a tale, she said. The old man nodded with a faint, grateful bow. He placed a small apple in her palm, then spoke without looking up. There is a lighthouse, he said, far to the south, where the waves swallow the sun. But its light does not shine for ships. No, it shines only for those returning home. And only if their heart still remembers the way. No one spoke. Then Theo stepped forward and, haltingly, asked, Is true? The old man smiled without answering. That night rain returned. It was soft at first, a whisper on the leaves, then heavier, colder. They took shelter in an abandoned barn just off the road, its roof slanted but intact. Straw lay dry in the corners, and the smell of old hay and horse lingered in the rafters. They didn't speak much. Marta laid out the rest of the bread. Joseph made a small fire in a broken lantern. Anton quietly unbuttoned his coat and, without a word, draped it over Emile's thin shoulders, whose own coat was soaked through. Emile blinked at him, then closed his eyes without speaking. That night, for the first time, all 5 slept close. Not as strangers. Not yet as friends. But something in between. Somewhere in the middle of the night, Marta woke. At first, it was the wind. Then, the silence. She sat up slowly, the barn cold around her. The fire had died down to embers, barely flickering. Then she saw it. Out in the field beyond the half-broken door, a light. Faint. Flickering. Too high for a lantern. Too still for fire. It pulsed once, then again. Not moving. Not calling. Just there. She stood, careful not to wake the others, and stepped to the threshold. The grass outside was wet. The world felt paused. The light disappeared. She stood there for a long time, listening to the wind, until only the soft breathing behind her reminded her that she was not alone. By morning, the rain had passed. Birdsong returned. The air was sharp and fresh. But when they stepped outside, the tent and the old storyteller were gone. Only the apple crate remained, with 2 apples left behind, each one carved faintly with a spiral. Anton frowned. He didn't even leave tracks. No, Marta said softly, picking up the apples. But he left a direction. They looked south. The road curved over the next ridge, where clouds sat low and the horizon felt larger than it should. Anton rubbed his eyes. Still time to turn back, you know. Marta shook her head. No, she said, as the others gathered beside her. We've stepped onto the kind of road that doesn't end where it begins. She looked out at the path, at the waiting sky, and added, Now we walk it all the way. By midday, the trees grew taller, and the world around them dimmed beneath the weight of the coming sky. Clouds gathered low, bruised with rain. Wind moved through the branches like breath through reeds. They smelled the river before they heard it, a cold, deep scent of moving water and earth. And when the trees finally parted, it was there, wide, slow, and endless. The bridge was broken. What had once been a narrow path of wood and rope now sagged into the water like a forgotten promise. Half the planks were gone. The center hung in shreds, swaying with the wind. Crossing was not an option. Anton stood at the edge, his hands on his hips. Perfect. We build a raft, he said quickly. Cut wood. Use the cartwheels. No, Joseph murmured. He pointed to a crooked wooden sign nailed to a tree, nearly hidden beneath a curtain of moss. Ferry. Downstream. No one questioned him. They turned and followed the narrow path that trailed along the bank. It was not long before they saw smoke, faint, pale gray, curling upward between the trees. And there, at a bend in the river, stood a small hut made of driftwood and stone, leaning against the roots of an old willow. Beside it, a man waited. He was not young, not old, his face lined by wind, not time. He wore a long oilskin coat, his hands tucked into his sleeves. A rowboat rocked gently against the wooden dock behind him. He looked at them without surprise. I can take you, he said. But only 2 at a time. River won't hold more than that. Marta stepped forward. Emil's head rested against her shoulder, his skin hot with fever, his breath shallow. We'll go first, she said. The boat rocked as they stepped in. The ferryman said nothing. He rowed with slow, deliberate strokes, the oars dipping soundlessly into the gray water. Halfway across, the current pulled hard. Marta gripped Emil tighter, and he shivered in her arms. Rain began to fall in small, scattered drops. He whispered, barely more than breath. Mama, I'm sorry I fell. She froze. Her fingers curled around him as the oars kept moving. He wasn't speaking to her, not fully. His voice was drifting backward, toward a moment she couldn't see. But her eyes filled with tears. She had lost a child once. Long ago. A daughter who had been too small for the world, whose breath had been too short. She had held her as she faded. And for years afterward, Marta had forgotten how to hold anyone. Now, as the boat swayed beneath her, she remembered. She pressed her cheek to Emil's damp hair. It wasn't your fault, she whispered. On the shore behind them, Anton and Theo waited under the trees. Neither spoke at first. Finally, Anton asked, Why were you alone? Theo didn't look at him. His eyes were on the river. Our father, he stayed on the ship, Theo said. There was fire. Water. The deck was splitting. He yelled for us to jump. Where was your mother? Theo shook his head once. Home. She doesn't sail. Anton glanced at him. His voice was quieter now. He told you to jump? Theo nodded. Anton said nothing more. But something in him shifted. Joseph didn't speak at all. He stood apart, staring at the far side of the river, where reeds whispered and mist curled low along the water. His face was still, but in his eyes the sea returned, not the calm of the shore, but the storms he had once weathered. His past was never far. He carried it like he carried the cart, in silence. The second trip came, and then the third. When they were all across, the ferryman pulled the boat onto the bank. He stood, stretched his arms, and said, "You're not the first looking for a port." His voice was soft. "But not all make it." No one replied. He turned, stepped back into his boat, and pushed off into the current. The mist swallowed him before he reached the bend. One blink, and he was gone. Only ripples remained. They stood in silence, the wind curling at their backs. Emil coughed once, then leaned heavily into Marta's side. She pressed her hand to his forehead. "He's burning," she said, her voice tight. "His fever's rising." Anton looked at the forest ahead, then at the sloping land beyond. "There's a monastery," Marta added. "South of here. In the hills." "You've been there?" "Years ago. They keep herbs for the sick. Fever grass. It helps." Theo touched her arm. "Can we get there?" Marta looked up at the sky, now thick with clouds, and answered without hesitation. "We have to." Behind them, the river whispered. Before them, the path curved into deeper wood. They began to walk again, slower now, closer together. And from the far side of the bank, hidden in the fog, something watched them. Silent. Still. Waiting. The monastery came into view just as the afternoon light began to tilt amber. It stood tucked between the hills like a thought too soft to be spoken aloud, stone walls curved with time, ivy climbing the corners, and a single bell tower rising above it all like a raised hand in prayer. Marta slowed her steps. The air here smelled of sage and moss, the kind of scent that held memories. She had not seen these walls in many years, but they were unchanged. The bells still hung where they always had, and in the garden beyond the gate, lavender still grew wild in the cracks of the path. At the arched entry, a figure waited. Sister Elsa, wrapped in grey robes, her hair silver, her hands folded lightly before her. Her eyes, though lined with age, were warm and undimmed. "Marta," she said, as though no time had passed. "I didn't know if—" "You're home," Elsa said gently. "And the door has always been open." Marta smiled, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind her, Emil leaned heavily into Theo, his breathing rough. Sister Elsa took one look and nodded. "Bring him to the herb room. Quickly." The monastery was quiet inside, not the silence of emptiness, but of listening. Stone halls echoed with their footfalls as they carried Emil to a narrow room lined with drying bundles of herbs, bottles of tinctures, and soft wool blankets. A younger monk lit a lantern. Another brought water. Marta sat beside the boy, her fingers smoothing the damp hair from his brow. His cheeks were flushed with heat, his hands cold. "He needs time," Elsa said. "And warmth." "We'll do what we can." Marta nodded, staying close. "I'll remain with him." "Of course." Anton lingered near the archway, shifting from foot to foot. He didn't like places like this. The stillness made his thoughts louder. He wandered out to the garden, then back, then out again, like a cat uncertain of its shadow. Theo wandered too, but with quieter steps. He found Joseph standing at the base of the bell tower, staring up. Without a word, Joseph began to climb the worn spiral steps. Theo followed. At the top, wind moved freely. The bell stood heavy in its timber frame, unmoving. Joseph walked to the edge and looked down at the hills below, slow, green, timeless. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, softly, he spoke. There was a ship. Long ago. We hit a reef. Half the crew made it to the boats. One didn't. He gripped the railing. A boy. About your age. I dove for him twice. The second time, he was gone. Theo looked down. Was he your son? Joseph shook his head. But I dreamed of him as if he were. Silence again, but a gentler kind. The kind that lets something old loosen its hold. Then Joseph added, the bell rang that night. That's the only sound I remember clearly. Theo said nothing. But when they went back down the stairs, he walked beside the man, not behind him. That evening, candles bloomed in the great stone hall. The sisters lit lamps along the windowsills and read softly from old books. Tales of cities that vanished in fog, of birds that crossed the sea in dreams. Marta asked for a story about home. Sister Elsa smiled, and opened a page. Emile stirred in his bed, feverish but listening. His fingers twitched when the word mother was spoken. Marta leaned close, whispering in his ear, You are part of my heart now. Even if you travel further than I can follow. He didn't reply. But his hand curled into hers. After the reading ended, the sisters hummed an old melody. Not quite a hymn, not quite a lullaby. It was something in between, something for in-between places, and Marta hummed with them, barely audible, stroking Emile's arm as he slept. Anton stayed in the shadows, arms crossed, but something in his shoulders had relaxed. The walls no longer pressed in quite so tightly. Theo found a bench near the herb garden and sat there alone, listening to the wind. He didn't cry, but his throat ached with the weight of memory. He wanted to ask someone, anyone, if his father might still be alive. But he didn't. He just watched the sky change. Far above them, a single bell creaked in the wind, not a full toll, just a murmur, as if even the bronze had begun to stir in its sleep. Back inside, Marta stepped out of the herb room just for a moment, just long enough to close her eyes, breathe in the scent of stone and time, and whisper to herself, Please! Let him stay. It was not a prayer, but something close. Later, as the others rested, Anton slipped into the garden, needing air. The sky was dim, almost violet, the hills black against the fading light. Then he saw it. Far beyond the stone wall, a single rider, silhouetted on a distant ridge. Still. Watching. He narrowed his eyes, but the figure did not move. And then, just as the wind changed, the rider turned, and disappeared beyond the hill. Just before midnight, Sister Elsa returned to Marta with a small bundle. A letter, she said. Left many years ago. In case you ever came back. Marta took it with slow fingers. The parchment was yellowed. The ink faded. She opened it, and read. Then her face went still. Her lips parted. What is it? Anton asked, stepping inside. Marta's voice was a whisper. My son is alive! She looked up, breath trembling. He went south. They say he still walks. Her fingers gripped the edge of the bed. We can't stop now. Outside, the bells did not ring. But in the hills, wind moved through the grass like footsteps not far behind. The hills opened slowly before them, like the turning of a heavy page. It had been 3 days since they left Greyhill, and though the path wound gently across the soft rises, the sky above was hard and low, full of leaden clouds that never broke, only gathered. Wind stirred the grass in wide, patient circles. The road beneath their feet was dry clay, cracked and pale, but it smelled of rain that hadn't yet come. Emile lay wrapped in wool in the back of the cart, his face still pale but no longer burning. He slept in fits, waking only when Marta whispered his name or read aloud from the letter, again and again. Her voice trembled each time she reached the line. He went south. They say he still walks. She would fold it away, then open it again moments later, as if fearing it might vanish. Anton walked beside the cart, silent for much of the morning. His eyes scanned the hills. Theo followed behind, humming softly under his breath, a song their father once sang, broken by the gaps in his memory. Joseph, as always, led the cart. His hand never left the wooden shaft. He didn't look back, but nothing escaped his gaze. It was near midday when they reached the crossroads. There, standing by the broken signpost, one arm resting lazily on the wood, was a man in a dark traveling cloak. His boots were dusted in the same red clay they walked on, and a copper ring shone on his right hand. He nodded in greeting, his face tired but kind. "Afternoon," he said. "Road to Ehrenwald runs steep this season. Might I walk a piece with you?" Marta looked to the others. Anton's brows narrowed. "You're headed south?" she asked. He nodded. "As far as the coast, if luck holds. I've work where sea meets stone." "What kind of work?" Anton asked. The man smiled, brief and without teeth. "I listen to metal. Fix what's cracked. Bell repair, mostly. Villages don't have many left who know how." His name, he said, was Gregor. Marta nodded. "You're welcome to walk." Anton didn't look pleased, but said nothing more. Theo, curious, fell into step beside the stranger. He tried a few words in his own tongue, and to his surprise Gregor answered, brokenly, but with understanding. "Old sailor taught me," Gregor said. "Years back. South Coast boys have strong voices. Hard to forget their words." Joseph said nothing, but his eyes dropped once, to the copper ring on Gregor's hand. He said nothing still, but he did not take his eyes off it again. That evening, the group reached an old watermill, long abandoned, its wheel broken, its stone walls half wrapped in ivy and lichen. It was dry, and sheltered from the rising wind. Good enough for the night. They made camp beneath the remnants of the mill's outer roof. Gregor proved handy. He fixed the cracked wheel on the cart, reinforced the axle with twine and broken bark. He even built a small fire that burned steady against the wind. "I once knew a crew," he said that night, staring into the flames, "that sailed a cargo ship through the Black Shoals. One storm, they said, rose like a wall, swallowed them whole. Only one made it back. What happened to the rest?" Theo asked. Gregor shrugged. "No one knows. That's the kind of sea it is." Marta stirred the soup. "Have you ever been to the southern coast?" Gregor looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I've been to places people don't speak of. And places they can't forget. The coast is both." No one answered. But the silence around the fire grew heavier. That night, while the others slept, Anton woke to a sound, a voice, low and fast, speaking words he didn't recognize. He sat up slowly, careful not to make the boards creak. Near the far edge of the mill, in the shadow of the collapsed chimney, Gregor was speaking softly, not to himself, but to someone else hidden in the dark. Anton didn't see a second figure. But he saw the gleam of another copper ring, just for a moment, flash in the gloom, and vanish again. By morning, nothing had changed, except the piece of bark, wedged beneath the cart's back wheel. On it, carved in deep, uneven lines, "If they return, no one will have time to run." Joseph read it without expression. Theo stood beside him, pale. He looked down at Gregor's hand, then back up at the others. "I saw rings like that," he said softly, "on the men who burned our ship." Theo sat apart from the others as they packed their things the next morning. The light was soft, but the shadows beneath his eyes were not. He held a twig in his fingers, breaking it into smaller and smaller pieces. He didn't say much, not since the night before. Marta came and sat beside him, her knees cracking gently as she bent. "You don't have to speak if you don't want," she said. He shook his head. "I want to. But I don't know what matters anymore." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "What matters is what you carry, and what you choose to keep." Theo looked up. "If Gregor is one of them, if he helped burn our ship, then we'll find out," she said. "And we'll decide what comes next." Her voice was calm, but her grip on his shoulder stayed firm, like an anchor. Joseph, watching from the edge of the path, slowly opened a hidden compartment beneath the cart. Inside, among spare rope and iron nails, lay something wrapped in cloth, an old, salt-stained compass. He didn't look at it often. But now he turned it in his palm, its needle twitching toward the hills. Not north. Not east. But somewhere else entirely. He didn't trust copper. Not on a man's finger. And not in the silence that followed him like a second shadow. The land changed before they noticed. Hills turned to flat dust plains. The green faded to beige and gray. Trees thinned, then vanished. The wind grew hot and dry, tasting faintly of metal and earth. And in the distance, drifting on the air like a low chant, came the sharp scent of salt. They walked quietly now. No birds. No shadows but their own. Emile sat upright in the cart, wrapped in linen. His fever had eased, and his eyes no longer glazed. He clutched a small round stone he'd picked up that morning, warm from the sun, smooth from time. Marta smiled gently as she watched him trace the grooves with his thumb. Theo, lighter now in step, stayed close to his brother. He had begun to speak again, asking questions, humming pieces of old songs. Gregor, walking behind them, answered politely when asked, never much, but enough to earn more of Theo's fragile trust. Anton didn't share it. He walked on the edge of the group, eyes narrowed, jaw tense. His hand stayed close to his belt knife. He didn't need reasons, just the wrong wind and the way Gregor always seemed a few steps ahead in silence. They reached the village near the salt quarry by late afternoon. It was more of a cluster than a true town, square white buildings stained pale orange, smoke drifting from chimneys, goats tied beneath awnings. And in the air, the ever-present burn of salt. They entered the tavern quietly. Marta bartered for bread and dried figs while Joseph refilled their water from the stone well. Anton stepped to the counter, where the barkeep, a bald man with fingers blackened from years of brine work, leaned in close. "You didn't hear this from me," the man whispered, eyes flicking to Theo. "But someone came through yesterday. Asked about sea-washed boys. One with a scar on his hand. Said he had light hair." Anton froze. "Did they say why?" The man shook his head. "Didn't ask? I know better." An hour later, Gregor was gone. He'd said nothing. One moment he was leaning against a post in the square. The next, just footprints. Joseph returned from the quarry path, his coat dusted white with fine powder. When he noticed Gregor missing, he simply reached into the cart and adjusted his satchel, shifting something inside. Marta caught the movement. "What did you see?" "His boots," Joseph said. "They carry cave dust." "Salt mines?" Joseph nodded once. He went underground. By nightfall, the heat had broken, replaced by wind and whispers. Marta made the choice. "We go now," she said. Anton frowned. "Now?" She looked toward the south. "They're already looking. We don't give them the night." They left the village quietly, torches wrapped, wheels muffled with damp cloth. And just as the road disappeared behind them, 3 figures appeared on the northern ridge. Horsemen. Cloaked. Silent. Watching. Anton saw them first. "Run!" The path turned narrow, between broken stone walls, then downward into a salt canyon, where high cliffs on either side echoed with the sound of hurried footsteps and strained breaths. The cart groaned over the uneven ground. When the riders began to descend, Anton turned and, without pause, shoved the cart sideways. It struck the canyon wall, tipped, and scattered their food and water across the rocks. The riders slowed. So did the group, just long enough to breathe. "Come on!" Marta called, and they ran. In the chaos, Gregor vanished. One moment, he was beside them. The next, only echoes where his steps should have been. No one saw which way he turned. No one called his name. Joseph kept moving. Somewhere deep in the canyon, Theo stumbled. He caught a rock wrong and cried out. Before anyone else moved, Anton was there, arms catching the boy, lifting him without a word. Theo looked up in shock. For a moment, Anton didn't glare or sigh. He only nodded. "I've got you." And Theo, for the first time, let someone carry him. They found shelter in a ruined chapel, long forgotten and half swallowed by the dust. Its stone arches still held against the sky. The altar was cracked. The roof had holes. But it was shelter. They slid the old wooden door closed and leaned into the dark. No footsteps followed. Only wind. Later, by the dim glow of a small lantern, Theo noticed something on the wall behind the altar. A painting, faded but clear. A ship. With red sails. A white harbor. The river from home. "That's ours," he whispered. Marta stood beside him, breath caught. "It's the ferry. From our coast." "How did it get here?" No one answered. But something in the air shifted. They weren't just heading south. They were nearing something that remembered them. Morning broke pale and sharp. Outside the chapel door, the sand had shifted slightly. Dust drifted across the flat stones. And in it, a single boot print. Deep. Familiar. Gregor's. He had found them. But had not come in. They saw the sea before they smelled it. At first, just a shimmer of light on the far horizon, like a silver thread pulled tight between earth and sky. Then came the scent, sharp and alive, full of salt and memory. And finally, as they crested the last hill, the full sweep of it appeared, the ocean, endless and breathing, crowned with gulls and wind. The group stood in silence, letting the sound reach them, that long, ancient rhythm of water meeting land. Wind curled around their clothes and hair. Even the dust in the air seemed changed, sweetened by salt. For a moment, none of them moved. Theo fell to his knees, his fingers curling into the sand. He didn't cry. Not quite. He just whispered, "We made it." Beside him, Emile stood in silence, thin arms wrapped around himself. His lips barely moved as he said, "Tattoo, we're almost home." Marta placed a hand on his shoulder. It was trembling. She didn't know if it was from the wind, the walk, or something deeper. Joseph stood alone at the edge of the cliff, his coat whipping in the gusts. He stared at the waves without blinking. This was the same sea he had once crossed. The same sea he had once lost someone to. For years he had avoided it. Now it was waiting for him. Marta closed her eyes. She remembered the sea from her youth. Not this sea, not exactly, but the way it smelled, the way it whispered things you didn't dare speak aloud. It hadn't changed. She had. The village below was built into the slope, whitewashed houses with nets hanging from posts, small boats tied with heavy ropes. It was a place that had lived 1,000 storms and still stood. At the dock, they found an old man mending sails beneath a tarp. His hands were gnarled like driftwood. His beard was salt and snow. They called him Have. He looked them over with a gaze that had seen more than it said. "You're not merchants," he said. "No," Marta replied. "But we're looking for a way across." He squinted toward the sea. "You'll need more than a boat." They shared their story in parts. Not everything. Just enough. Have nodded slowly. "I knew the port you speak of. North side of the Cape. Used to trade there in better years." "You'll take us?" Anton asked. "I might," Have said. "But you should know, a ship with black sails has been seen lately. It doesn't fly a flag. It doesn't speak. But it follows the coast. Picks up the scent of survivors." Theo turned pale. Have continued. "If you cross, do it quietly. And not in daylight." Anton frowned. What would they want with us? Have rubbed his hands together, rough palms hissing. "Maybe nothing," he said. "Or maybe everything." That night, the sky was clear but restless. The stars swam behind thin clouds, and the sea whispered with rising breath. Theo and Anton sat together on the rocks near the shore, the lantern light behind them. Theo asked, "Why did you come with us?" "Really?" Anton was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, he answered, "Because for the first time, there was nowhere else to hide." Theo looked out at the water. "Do you miss where you came from?" Anton considered it. "I don't know if I had a place. Only corners. Things I left behind." Theo nodded. "Then maybe this can be a beginning." Anton didn't answer. But he didn't walk away either. Inside the small inn where they sheltered, Marta unfolded the letter once more. Its paper was worn at the corners now, its ink smudged. The final lines mentioned a southern port, where someone had once seen a boy who matched her son's name and age, now a young man, working on the docks, looking to the sea as if it owed him something. Marta pressed the letter to her chest. She had come to take Theo and Emile home. But what if home waited for her too, in a different harbor? She didn't yet know what she would choose. Later that night, when the wind rose again and the gulls screamed overhead, Marta lit a lantern and read the letter one last time. Her hand hovered over the final sentence. He watches the harbor each morning, as if someone will come. She imagined her son, tall and now older, his face hidden behind years. Would he know her? Would he want to? She closed the letter with slow hands and whispered, "I'm coming, if the sea lets me." In the morning, Emile wandered to the beach while the others loaded supplies. He came back with a small stone, smooth and worn by the waves. It was shaped like a heart, uneven, but unmistakable. He handed it to Marta. "It's like home," he said. "Strong and quiet." She closed her fingers around it. "Then I'll carry it." Just as they stepped onto Hav's boat, a wide, low-sailed vessel with a hull that groaned like it had memory, Gregor appeared at the dock. He walked with even steps. Not rushed. Not fearful. His coat was drier than it should have been. His eyes unreadable. He said simply, "If you go out tonight, they'll be waiting." "Who?" Anton asked. Gregor looked at him. "The ones who don't need names anymore." He turned to Marta. "In a storm, everything looks the same. Even death. No threat. No plea. Just fact." Then he walked away, and was swallowed by the mist beyond the net posts. Hav stood at the rudder, watching the clouds gather. "Storm will come by tomorrow," he said. He looked at Marta. Then Joseph. Then the boys. "If you mean to leave, leave now." He didn't smile. But he didn't stop them. And the wind, already rising, carried the scent of the deep. The boat left the shore like a secret. No words. No fanfare. Just the creak of old wood, and the dip of oars in quiet water. Above them, the sky was a dull blue-gray, stretched like worn cloth. A single gull circled once, then vanished inland. They moved into the dark. Emile was wrapped in a thick wool blanket, curled in Theo's arms near the center of the boat. Marta sat at the bow, her hands wrapped around the heart-shaped stone Emile had given her. Her eyes never left the horizon. The wind tugged gently at her scarf. She felt the weight of everything, the journey, the letter in her coat, and the boy who now leaned into her like he had always belonged. Joseph stood near Hav at the stern, watching the waves with a sailor's silence. Anton helped push off, then sat beside Theo, gripping the oar with white knuckles. Hav steered steadily, his eyes scanning the sea like a man who had known it too long to trust it. "If there's a chase," he said, voice flat, "it's oars for all. We move together, or not at all." No one spoke. But all of them heard. The wind picked up as the hours passed. Slow at first. Then insistent. The sea no longer sighed, it spoke. Long, low phrases that curled into the boat's ribs. Clouds gathered, drawn from the west. Theo pressed his forehead against Emile's. "We're close," he whispered. "Hold on." Lightning flickered in the distance, not yet near, but too steady to ignore. The kind of light that promises it will return. Marta turned slightly, shielding Emile with her body. Her lips moved, though no one heard the words. Then Anton stood. He pointed with a shaking hand. "There!" All eyes turned. Far behind them, against the curve of dark water, a shape, tall, narrow, too still to be a wave. And rising above it, black sails. The kind that never flapped. The kind that waited. "Row," Hav said. No shout. No panic. But the word was a match struck in the dark. Theo and Anton grabbed the oars, each finding the rhythm without needing to speak. Joseph tied down the sail and dropped beside Hav, helping him hold the rudder as the wind fought to twist it free. Marta knelt low, her hands clutched together. Not from fear, but from faith. The kind that lives under silence for years and returns when there's nothing left to do. The boat groaned with the force of the waves. Spray hit their faces like glass. The sails strained above them. Still the black ship came. Faster than wind. Faster than fear. Then the storm arrived. Not with thunder, but weight, air so heavy it bent the spine. The first lightning bolt struck the water behind them, bright enough to blind. The second struck closer. Hav cursed and gripped the tiller with both hands. Joseph wrapped one arm around the rope and the other around the old sailor. "We don't let it take us." Theo's arms burned. Anton rowed until his fingers bled, the salt biting deep. The boat rocked like a cradle, but the cradle hung over an abyss. And through it all, Emil stared at the sky. Then, softly, he said, "Mama." Marta turned to him. But there was no fear in his face. Only calm. Like the sea knew him. And he knew it. Behind them, the black ship crept closer. Closer still. Then, a shift. The waves beneath it bucked. A roar rose from nowhere. The black vessel tipped, hard to starboard. Its sails twisted, caught in a gust that bent the mast. And then, snapped. The ship spun sideways. A wave the size of a house rose and swallowed it. No sound. No cry. Only the collapse of wood and the hiss of torn canvas. The sea closed over it like nothing had happened. The boat rocked in the aftershock. Then stilled. Only the wind remained. Only breath. The crews sat in silence. 1 minute. 2. 5. Then Hav spoke, voice hoarse but steady. "The sea chooses." He looked back at the others. "And today, it chose you." Slowly, the tension broke. Marta let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her fingers tightened around the stone in her hand. Anton wiped his face with his sleeve, blinking salt from his eyes. He looked to Theo and nodded, nothing said, but something seen. Theo leaned back, the oar slipping from his fingers. Joseph remained at Hav's side, one hand still gripping the rudder. The sea was his again, or perhaps it never stopped being. No one spoke for a long time. There was only the rhythm of the waves, slower now. Gentler. Familiar. And in the distance, through the thinning mist, land. A jagged outline. A tower. A harbor. Faint lights along the shore. Theo sat up straighter. "I know that place," he whispered. "I've seen it, in my dreams." Marta turned the stone in her hand. Then reached into her coat and pulled out the letter. Her eyes traced the words once more, though she knew them by heart. She looked at the shore. "My son may be there," she said softly. Then turned to the boys beside her. "But first, you're home." The wind carried them forward. The storm behind them. And the future ahead. The harbor came into view like a memory. Low roofs sloped toward the docks, their terracotta tiles warm beneath the morning light. Boats of every size bobbed in neat rows, their hulls painted in colors faded by sun and salt. And above it all, the gentle clang of tram bells, the scent of coffee and warm bread, and shop signs in a language that only Theo and Emil could truly understand. They had arrived. Theo stood at the edge of the dock, eyes wide, lips trembling. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Tears ran freely down his cheeks, and he didn't wipe them away. Emil gripped Marta's hand tightly, his eyes moving from boat to building to the people walking by in the kind of slow, sunlit rhythm that only came with home. Marta didn't speak either. She only smiled. Behind them, Hav moored the boat and began to unfasten the ropes. He stepped onto the dock with the same ease he'd shown on water, adjusted his coat, and looked at each of them one last time. To Anton, he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Returning," he said, "is its own kind of art." Anton nodded, his throat tight. Hav didn't wait for farewells. He turned, walked down the wharf, and was soon lost among masts and gulls. Just like a wave, one that came and went. They moved slowly through the streets. Theo led them. The stones beneath their feet were smooth and familiar. The corners came back to him before the turns. A building with blue shutters, a door with faded numbers, the smell of roasted nuts from a market stall that hadn't moved in years. Here, he whispered, almost to himself. This way. They passed vendors calling in the local tongue, children darting between carts, cats sunning themselves on stairs. A small tram trundled past, and Emile smiled at it, eyes following it around the bend. They reached the market square. There, near the fish stands, an old fisherman sat on an overturned crate, mending a net. Theo approached him, heart pounding. "Excuse me," he said in the language of his birth. "Have you seen my father?" The old man looked up, slow and careful. "The storm ship," he said. "Yes. I know the one. He came in 3 days ago. Said he lost everything but hope. Said he was still looking." Theo nearly fell to his knees again. Instead, he ran. The house was just a few minutes away, down a narrow path beside the old church. A stone building, small but strong, with blue curtains in the window and a view of the water. And there, in front of the door, stood a man. His coat was heavy, his shoulders broad, and his hair streaked with gray. He turned at the sound of footsteps. And froze. His eyes were the same color as Theo's. And Emile's. And something in his expression crumpled all at once, pain, joy, and disbelief all colliding at the edge of tears. Theo didn't wait. He ran into his father's arms and didn't let go. No words. Just breath and shoulders shaking. Just time, mended in a heartbeat. Emile reached out, timid at first, then firmer. He touched the old sea-worn coat. "Tattoo?" His father knelt and opened his arms, and the three of them stood in a quiet circle of salt and light, wrapped in the silence only love can carry. Marta stood a few steps back. She didn't move. Didn't need to. She watched them, hands clasped, the stone Emile had given her still in her coat pocket. Her heart ached in a way that was both sharp and soft. Joseph stepped beside her. He didn't speak. He simply stood near, as he always had. Anton joined them. "We brought them back," he said. He looked at the street behind them. "We made it." Marta nodded. "Yes. We did." And for a long moment, they all just stood in the sunlight. Inside, Theo's father made tea with honey and salt. He moved slowly, like he still expected the sea to sway beneath his feet. "I've been working a few docks over," he said. "Mostly nights. There's a small port near the lighthouse, quieter, but there are some folks from your side of the world." He looked to Marta. "There's a young man who wears a silver cross. Speaks gently. Comes by every day. Walks to the lighthouse and back. Says he's waiting for someone." Marta didn't answer at first. Her hand reached slowly to her coat, touching the letter like a compass. "A silver cross?" she asked. He nodded. "Says it's a gift. Wears it like it means something." Marta looked toward the window. Toward the coast. Toward the lighthouse, barely visible through the fog. "Maybe," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else, "I'll stay a little longer." The morning was soft with mist. The sea breathed in and out, and gulls cried in the quiet way they do when no one is watching. Marta walked slowly, her boots brushing against wild grass. A narrow path wound south along the cliffs, then curved toward the lighthouse, tall, weathered, gray with age. Its lantern was still, not lit, though it caught the light of the rising sun like an old coin. In her coat pocket was the letter. And beneath it, folded carefully, a small square of white cloth, stitched long ago with a child's name in thread the color of ash and river water. Joseph and Anton had walked with her part of the way. Then, wordlessly, they stopped. "This is yours," Anton said. She nodded, and walked on alone. The lighthouse stood on a bluff of stone, its base surrounded by tufts of wild thyme and pale flowers that bloomed only near salt. Wind tugged at Marta's scarf. She tightened it once, then climbed the slope. There, near the base of the tower, on a flat stone still damp from morning dew, sat a young man, perhaps 30, perhaps younger. His coat was worn at the elbows. A silver cross hung from a chain around his neck. His hands rested on a small notebook, closed but not forgotten. He looked up as she approached, slow and silent. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Marta asked quietly, "Is your name Luca?" He blinked. His breath caught. "Yes," he said. "But no one's called me that in a long time." She stepped closer. "My name used to be Marta Levin." He stood. Slowly. She continued, "A long time ago, I lost a son." The man didn't speak. Not right away. Then, with a voice not much older than his childhood, he said, "I used to dream that someone would come. Not loudly. Just walk up the hill and ask. I thought maybe I'd made it all up. That I only wanted it too much." Marta reached into her coat and took out the cloth, the old square, faded but whole. She unfolded it. He saw the stitches, his name. Her hand. He reached out, and when his fingers touched it, he wept. No sound. Only shoulders shaking, and wind rushing gently past. They sat together on the stone, side by side. They didn't speak of everything. Some things didn't need explaining. Some questions would come later, or never. Marta asked how he came to be here. Luca spoke of storms, of ships, of foster homes and names that never fit. Of learning to fix things, lanterns, sails, old hinges on tired doors. He never searched far. But he waited. Always near the sea. "I like to imagine," he said, "that one day someone would find me not because they had to, but because they wanted to." Marta didn't ask why he hadn't searched. Luca didn't ask why she didn't find him sooner. They sat in silence, present, not chasing the past. After a long while, Luca looked down at his notebook. "I write stories now. Not big ones. Little ones. About sailors and tides and wind that forgets your name." He smiled. "I've started collecting them. From the harbor. The ones no one writes down." Then, more quietly, he added, "I thought maybe I'd write yours one day. If you'd let me." Marta looked at him. Her eyes were wet again, but calm. "I'll help," she said. The day passed slowly. They spoke more. Walked the shoreline. Shared bread and tea in the keeper's hut, Luca's home. Marta told him about Theo and Emile, and how she walked beside them as far as they needed. Luca listened like someone who'd been waiting to understand the shape of his own absence. As the sun fell lower, a cart creaked up the path. Anton. He didn't speak, only tipped his head as he saw her sitting on the bench by the lighthouse. She stood, walked a few steps toward him. They looked out toward the water together. Gulls soared in long, slow circles. The lighthouse cast no light, it wasn't needed yet. But it stood tall anyway. "Are you coming back?" Anton asked. Marta shook her head. "I'm not leaving yet." She paused, then added, "I used to think lighthouses were there to tell you where to go. To guide you." Anton waited. She smiled softly. "But I think they just stay. They wait. Quiet and certain. Like a mother." Anton didn't speak. He didn't need to. She touched his arm. "I'm not waiting anymore. But I'll stay. Just a little while." He nodded. Then left her to the sea, the wind, and the boy she had found once more. Morning arrived on quiet feet. The port stretched out in a soft, golden haze. Nets were being untangled by calloused hands. Gulls circled and called overhead. The sea, once wild and deep, now shimmered like a polished mirror. Somewhere, a kettle whistled. Somewhere else, someone was laughing. It was a city that had survived its storms. At the dock, Theo stood beside his father, the ropes of a new fishing boat coiled neatly nearby. Emile sat on a crate, swinging his feet, holding tightly to the heart-shaped stone Marta had once carried. They weren't running anymore. They were returning, to a life, not to a memory. "We'll take it slow," their father said. "Fish when the water's kind. Rest when it isn't." Theo nodded. He looked older somehow, though only days had passed. Not taller. Not stronger. Just steadier. He turned, searching the dock, and waved when he saw Anton. "You were my captain," he said with a grin. "Even without a ship." Anton gave a crooked smile. "You rowed better than me by the end. And you didn't leave," Theo added. "That matters more." They shook hands. It felt like a farewell and a promise in one. Up the hill, near the lighthouse, Marta sat on a weathered bench beside Luca. The morning light caught the edge of his silver cross as it swayed gently against his chest. On his lap rested a notebook, open to a new page. Marta's fingers moved slowly over the lines he had written. She didn't read out loud. She just followed the rhythm, like folding dough or tying bundles of herbs. Something familiar. Something that didn't rush. "You wrote about the lighthouse," she said. "I think," Luca replied, "that I've always been riding toward it." Marta nodded. "It's a good place to begin." He looked at her. "Would you write one with me?" "I already am," she said softly. Nearby, Joseph leaned on the wooden fence, watching the waves break along the rocks below. He breathed in deeply, not to prepare, not to brace, but just because he could. When he turned back, he found Marta beside him. "It's quiet now," he said. And for the first time, he smiled. Not much. But it stayed. She returned the smile. "You earned that silence." He shrugged, still half sailor. "It was never about earning." Anton sat on the steps of a small bakery, map unfolded in his lap. It was blank in some places, roads unmarked, cities unnamed. He traced his finger down the page. When Marta approached, he looked up. "What if I just go? No plan. No instructions. Just walk and see what stays under my feet. Then," she said, "it'll be your road. And that's enough." He folded the map and stood. Later, at the train station, the whistle blew once, low and far away. Steam curled around the platform like breath on cold glass. Anton adjusted his pack. Marta stepped toward him, holding something in her hands, wrapped in a square of cloth. "A roll," she said, placing it into his palm. "Still warm." Then, leaning in, she added with a playful tone, "But don't eat it all at once. Even wanderers need to ration their sweetness." Anton blinked. Then, for the first time in all their days together, he laughed. Full, quiet, and honest. Marta touched his sleeve, then let go. Back at the dock, Emile pulled something from his small satchel, a folded sheet, carefully drawn with colored chalk. He handed it to Marta. It was a picture of the lighthouse, with the words, "Here lives the heart." She held it to her chest. "Thank you," she said. "I'll keep it close." He nodded, and Theo waved one more time before the boat pushed off, cutting gently through the water like a memory returning home. That evening, Marta stood once more on the path by the lighthouse. Luca had gone to fetch more ink from town. The sun hung low, drenching the sea in copper and rose. Anton approached quietly. "You're really staying?" Marta looked toward the horizon. "I'm not waiting anymore. But yes, I'll stay. A little while." Anton nodded. He didn't ask more. They stood in silence, side by side. Wind brushed against them, soft and familiar. And far away, across the water, beyond where the sun met sea, stood a man in a dark coat. Gregor. He stood alone at the edge of another shore. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he removed the copper ring from his finger. He looked at it once, and let it fall. It hit the water with barely a sound, then disappeared. He turned inland, and walked away. "Thank you for walking with us tonight." In a world that often rushes ahead, this story offered something slower, a reminder that not all journeys need maps, and not all endings are truly the end. Wherever you are, whoever you are, may you find someone who says, "You've come far. Rest here a while." If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Deep Sleep Stories, where every week a new path opens, quiet, thoughtful, and made just for you. And if sleep has already found you, then let dreams carry you gently, like a boat on calm water. Until next time.